Our, our interview this morning is with William Bill Carlton. Bill was born in Fort Worth in June of 1931, served in the United States Air Force from November of 1950 until December of 1954. Today is Thursday, September the 6th, year 2012. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Mr. Carlton in any way. Also in the room we have Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are our videographers. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, Bill, you can tell us about your time in the Air Force, maybe start what you were doing before you enlisted and just go from there, sir.
Well, let's see. You want me to start when I got out of high school? Or?
Yes, sir, that'll work.
I got out of high school and I worked all my life. My mother supported the family. My dad drank a lot. He's gone. A lot of time he'd get some hot checks out and he'd disappear to California for a year or two till my mother got him cleared up. And then he'd come back. But anyway, my mother supported the family. And during the times I was growing up, my grandmother, when our birthdays, me and my brother's birthdays or Christmas, she would give me and him savings bonds. And after I got out of high school, I wanted to go to college, but I really didn't feel like I was a good enough student, and I really wasn't, but I still wanted to go. So my mother said, well, I'll tell you what, you pick out a college and we'll see if we can work it out. I wanted to go to engineering school. I went to Texas Tech, Lubbock, for a year. And my mother kept me in there. I worked while I was in there in the dorm. I worked in the chow hall, paid my room and board. So I didn't have much money to fool around with at those days. But anyway, I got out of college. Didn't do too well. I failed chemistry and I was studying architectural engineering. So at midterm, I busted chemistry and decided, well, maybe I wasn't cut out to be an engineer. So I switched my major over to Jewish engineering. And you know what Jewish engineering is?
No.
Business administration. Anyway, I switched over it, and I actually did worse in it. So after a year in college, I came back to Fort Worth and went to work for the bomber plant, building the B-36. And I was out there, and of course, the Korean War had started, and the draft had started. And I knew I was going to get drafted, and just a matter of time. So I didn't want to go in the Army. So I looked at all the schools, Army and Navy and Air Force, and I was interested in photography. So Air Force had the best photography school. So I joined the Air Force. And I enlisted over at Love Field in Dallas, and they sent me immediately down to San Antonio. And I was down there for 2 weeks, and there was such a rush, people running to the Air Force to get away from the draft, that they had tents set up between the barracks. I mean, big old canvas tents, and 3-tier bunks in them. It's so crowded that people walking forth and back and forth in those tents, dust was just scattered in. It was, a lot of people were going over the fence, taking off. I don't blame them, I was thinking about it. But they decided to send a bunch of us up to Shepherd at Wichita Falls. So I went up to Shepherd for the rest of my enlistment. I mean, my basic, and of course I did pretty good up there, so they put in for a school, photography school in Denver at Lackland. Lackland? I can't remember. Too many years. But they had a school in Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. And I did real good in the school, got a couple of stripes, got my pick of base. I thought I was in love with a little old gal, so Carswell was open, and Naval Air Station was open, and the one down at Waco, John Connolly or whatever that air base down there was. I put in for 1, 2, 3, Carswell first, and so I thought I'd get one of them be close to the gal. Well, I got Carswell. I hadn't been back to Carswell in 2 months. My little romance fell apart. And then I couldn't get out of Carswell. It was a SAC base, and I stuck there the rest of my life. And what I did in the Air Force, my job, was to load and unload cameras, gun cameras, bomb sight cameras, aerial cameras, every kind of camera, radar cameras, and unload the cameras, make sure they were working correctly, and taking them to the photo lab. And that's all I did. And I had a chance to go in and work in the photo lab for a while. And I enjoyed that very much. And so after I got out of that, I thought, well, maybe I can get a job when I get out of the service in some photo lab. And but I did. I got out, went to work for a photographer. And that was about it in the Air Force. I wouldn't re-up. I didn't like the superior officers I had. They were all non-commissioned officers in World War II, and they got elevated to a temporary rank, like a first lieutenant or a captain, and they were over us out there in the field, and they didn't know what they was doing. They shouldn't have been there. So it was very, very hard people to work for, and I got real unhappy with the Air Force. So I wouldn't re-up. They offered me a pretty good deal, but I wouldn't. And that was about the story of my Air Force experience.
Okay.
Now, another reason I took the Air Force, my sister married a captain in the Air Force, real nice guy. And she eventually divorced him and then married another captain. And he eventually became a colonel. But of course, I was long gone by then. But I took 2 flights in a B-36. I had a chance to act as a crewman on my nose is running like a sieve. I got some. But I've only been up at B-36 twice, and just on a test hop. It was up just a few hours during the daytime, and we flew down over the Gulf of Mexico. And I remember the first flight, we lost an engine, and the pilot, I was back in the back. Have you ever been in a B-36? Do you know how you get from the front to the back? They had a tunnel, a little cart in it. You got in, laid down, and pulled yourself the back. But anyway, we're back there, and it's cold, and everything. Well, I don't know how I was up there a ways. But the pilot called back and said, "Hey, we've lost an engine. You better find your parachutes." And we got to looking around. We found some parachutes, but it looked like it came out of World War I. Holes in them. So I told the sergeant, I said, "Call up there and tell that pilot that I'm going to stay with the plane. I'm going to trust that one with a parachute." So we got back on the ground. I decided I wouldn't go any more test hops so that I could see what the parachutes were. So I was only telling my brother-in-law was the captain. He is my second brother-in-law, but he was stationed there, and I took several test hops with him in a B-25. He got me signed on as a crew. And I was just a crew member, got a few days off, Flew to Washington once and California once. But that's about the whole story of my Air Force career. I can say I did learn a trade when I got out. I went to work in the photography business, and I worked for Kodak and 2 other photo companies. And I made my all my living for 35 years in the photo business. And now that photo business is gone. It's all digital now. Dark rooms and things like that are just nearly non-existent. But anyway, I'm out of it. I draw two retirements from it, and Social Security.
So overall, you had a pretty good experience, really.
Yeah,
some ups and downs.
I found a trade. You know, I learned enough to get into it, and without getting a college education. You know.
You graduated high school in 48?
49.
49.
Pascal High School.
From Pascal, okay. For basic, had you ever been in an airplane before, Bill, before you joined the Air Force?
No.
Okay.
Well, now wait a minute. I helped build them.
You were out at
across the runway. You know,
Consolidated Vol T, I guess it was.
At the bomber plant, I helped
Right.
build a bomb bay trestle. Shot rivets and everything. You know, they went in that big brace thing and helped one of the wings up. And I built that thing for 6 months.
And that part went on a B-36?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when
How old were you when you were working out there then?
well, I just see, I'd gone to school a year, and I was 17, 18, 19.
So when things got a little tough at Tech and you came back home, you went out to the
Went
bomber
to
plant.
work at him. Went to work there. And
That would have been a good job back then, wouldn't it?
yeah, it was a good job. The only thing, see, we knew all a single guy knew was going to get drafted unless we had some kind of exemption, you know, or something.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to get drafted, and so that's the reason I started shopping around. And I checked with every school, you know, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, you name it, Marine Corps, and none of them had as good a school as Air Force did. And so I joined the Air Force and put in to go to that school and got it. And I'm glad I did. You know, I was able, what little I learned there and later on in the Air Force, I was able to make a living. Even though I really didn't get into photography much, I just got into the know-how of it. And I was a salesman all the time. I worked Kodak. I was a salesman. And so I don't regret being in the Air Force. I learned a trade there.
Mm-hmm.
And,
When you went to basic, first of all, you went down to Lackland, only there for a couple weeks, and then they shipped you up to Shepherd.
to Shepherd, yeah.
What do you think about basic? Had you ever been subjected to that discipline? And
Well, I took ROTC in high school.
okay,
And of course, I knew how to march from ROTC, and I was a first lieutenant in the ROTC. So the elementary things in basic, I already knew. You know, of course, you got more exercise in basic. You marched every day, which in high school, you marched maybe 3 times a week or something. And I didn't expect what I found in the Air Force. They didn't have the discipline that I was used to.
they did not have the discipline.
Did not have it.
Okay,
They just.
it was looser.
Well, you hadn't got any. Maybe I better not even say it, but they just, you know, took away all the things holding the blacks in the service. They just made them, and they were running over everybody, and nobody was doing anything about it. They were scared to. And I was real unhappy about the way I was in the barracks with some of them, and they were running over everybody there. And if you beat the hell out of one of them, well, they kick you out of service, you know. So I'm glad to get out of the basics.
What time did they roll you out in the morning?
6, I think.
Okay. Run you down to chow hall?
Yeah.
March down.
March you down there.
Okay. 1950. Was the cooking good?
Well,
long time ago.
I got where I liked SOS. You know what SOS stands for?
Well, I know what it stands for, but it's different. It's different in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy.
Yeah, it was good. It's pretty good. I got where I liked it. You know, I didn't like it at first, but I got it. The food after that was pretty good.
When you went up to Shepherd, you would have been up there in the wintertime, I guess, right?
Right.
Get pretty cold up there in the
You
wintertime?
bet. Walked on snow nearly every day.
Old wooden barracks?
No, luckily they had built some WAF barracks, you know, women Air Force Scouts, and they were 1 story. They weren't 2 story or 3 story, and they had bigger bathrooms, bigger showers. They were vacated, and we moved. We had 3 or 4 of them, and I was in one of them all through all my schooling up there. I got pneumonia up there from marching out there in that ice and snow, and I was in the base hospital for about 3 weeks. And when I got well, I went right back out to the snow, but I didn't catch it anymore.
When you finished your basic, they give you some leave. You come back to Fort
Yeah.
Worth.
Yeah, I got. I forget. I got a delay in traveling, you know, to give you a few days. But see, I had already finished my camera school, and out of the class, I was number 2, being the top.
Okay, you went from Shepherd to Denver.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Denver is Lowry Airport. That's where they had the school, and
Okay.
it was an air base. I was up there last year and couldn't even find it because they closed it down and built over it. Couldn't even find it. I found one building is a museum, and then of course none of it looked, because the houses all down built on the runways. It didn't even look the same.
It's not up there where the Air Force Academy. Well, the Air Force Academy is in Colorado Springs. I
Right,
guess,
right.
really. Yeah. Okay. When you went to this, I guess you'd call it an A school. The photographic school was an A school.
Well,
Well, it was a school.
yeah.
What kind of courses? I obviously photographic, but you learn all the equipment.
Well, mainly was equipment that the Air Force used, you know, on their planes, and you learn how to take them apart, how to troubleshoot them. Basically, it's sort of a mechanics course, I guess. Then you went in and learned about darkroom work, how to develop film and how to develop paper. I enjoyed that probably more than I did in the mechanics. However, I did well with all of it.
How long was that course?
You know, I've tried to think how long it was. I don't know. I can't remember. That pneumonia I caught in there between all my. It took me a good while to catch up. You know, I had to wait for another class to finish up. But I made good grades, and from my grades, I made a stripe, 2 stripes, no, just 1 stripe. And I got my pick of the bases that were open that could use my MOS, you know, number. And Carlton went up, and that's the reason I got to Carlton.
Were it not for this little girl, you probably could have gone anywhere in the world almost with the Air Force.
Biggest mistake I ever made. You know, when you're in love, you do some stupid things.
Okay.
That darn that love fell apart in about 2 months. Here I was on a base I couldn't get off of anymore. I mean, they would not let you off that base. You know, if you're Strategic Air Command would not. Once they got you, they kept you. And my brother-in-law tried to get me off. He was a captain. He couldn't do nothing with it. And but it was a dumb thing. I could have gone in. I wanted to go to Japan. I wanted to go to Germany. I wanted to go anywhere to see part of the world, but I couldn't get off the base. And
So you spent like 3 years at Carswell?
yeah, right at it.
Wow. And you were Strategic Air Command.
Right.
SAC.
SAC. Yeah.
They were flying all B-36s.
No, not all, but mostly bombers, you know. 8th Air Force.
Okay.
Um,
You didn't still have World War II stuff, though, did you?
yeah. We had
Like 24s and
we had 24s there. We had 25s there.
in 1951, 52, 53.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I flew on a B-25.
25,
So
yeah.
my brother-in-law was a pilot, and he flew superior officers around, like, you know, full colonels and generals to Washington and different places. And every once in a while he'd get me on as a crewman, just get me something to do, something to fly. And but yeah, there were several different planes. The only ones I worked on were the B-36. I didn't fly but twice on one. I wouldn't fly on one anymore.
You talked about gun cameras, bomb cameras, radar. What are the differences in all those things, Bill?
Well, yeah, and I also had an aerial camera. It's a long, you know, it's about this tall. It's got a big lens on it and everything, and it sits in the bomb bay.
Is that a recon camera?
Yeah, it's a recon camera, and you know, it uses, at that time I think it was like 4-inch film, black and white film, and then on gun cameras, that was a camera that fit right on the gun, and it takes is a motion picture type camera. Where they go out and shoot targets, you could see where the bullets were going, you know. Had a top secret clearance to do all that, because they had a camera that would run along, you'd fly along a road, it'd take a picture of that whole road and pinpoint every gun encampment or whatever, creek, post, everything else. Their aerial cameras, well, to demonstrate how they could take one above LaGrave Field, you know, the ballpark in Fort Worth. I mean, they're up high. This camera would take it, and you could blow it up. It had such good film in it. Blow it up and count the stitches on a baseball laying in the field. The darndest thing I ever saw. Real interesting.
Were those cameras and that film available to the general public, or
No,
was
sir.
that just military?
Just military.
Okay.
Only people well, I had a top secret clearance. Most people are cleared for classified, you know, but some of that stuff come in from overseas, and only people that had clearance could mess with it, develop it, or look at it, or whatever. But I enjoyed my darkroom work.
That was, those cameras and that kind of resolution, that was in the early 50s. Does it scare you to think about what they might have today?
What they might have today to do is really scare you, you know.
You think about the pictures we get from the moon and stuff like that?
Well, what gets me is how can you put pictures of people and anything and blow them up and you can recognize them from a little old bitty thing it shoves into your camera? I mean, how does that work? It don't sound right.
Went for, your brother-in-law took you on as a crew member on a 25 on occasion?
B-25.
Yeah. Little of that experience, what you might remember. Cold, hot, did it vibrate, make a lot of noise?
Yeah, it made a little noise. It's a lot of fun too. You get right up in the front end, you know, in that fiberglass, plexiglass front end. You lay there, and when you go into land, it looks like you're going to run through the runway. You know, you're going to. And it shook me up the first time I did it. I got up there, and I told my brother-in-law about it. He said, "Oh, wait, that's the fun part of it. You need to do that some more."
Did you have a personal camera with you on those?
I don't remember. I don't know if I took one with me or not. I know this much. We went to Washington, and I didn't take a coat, you know. I just took a jacket. And in order to get into a restaurant, I had to put on one of their ties. They wouldn't let anybody in the restaurant that didn't have a tie on or a coat. So I'd never been a place where I had to have a tie. Not from Fort Worth, but
You were like an E3 or an E4 then,
yes,
and you went to a place in Washington that required a jacket and a tie.
right.
How'd you afford that? Was that a little tough on your pocketbook?
Well, what they do, they give you a jacket because it was shirt sleeve weather, you know. And I had a shirt that had a collar on it, and I put my tie on and give me a jacket. That qualified I could get in. My brother-in-law didn't tell me that I needed that, you know. And but I thought, my God, what kind of place is this up here you got?
Now this was a place off the base. This
Hey,
wasn't.
this is in downtown Washington.
Okay. Wasn't EM or an NCO club or whatever.
No, they wouldn't have to do anything. It's just a civilian restaurant. But they had a rule that the men had to wear a coat and tie.
We back up somewhere before, Bill, you were talking about when you came back to Carswell, you did not live on the base. You lived off the
Well,
base?
I lived on there a while.
Okay.
And then I found out I could move home and get a little extra money. So I did. And I got caught speeding on my motorcycle, and I had to move back on the base. And I had to park my motorcycle on the outside of the base for 3 months or something, and I lost the strike. So, and then I moved back off the base after all that got over with, and I kept my nose clean from then on. You know, speeding on the base that's no big crime, you know, but you couldn't do it.
Overall, I guess I was thinking about the going to dinner and what have you. They pay you enough to live on?
No.
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 You have a job on the side or anything?
Well, I work part-time different places. You know, I worked all my life, so I can always find a part-time job, or could then. I had several jobs while I was in the service, but it's all after hours. You know, I had to put in an 8-hour day nearly every 5 days a week.
What kind of part-time job did you do?
Well,
Were they photographic stuff or?
Well, I have, and I worked at the studio a couple of times, and when the Polaroid come out, you know, it come out about that time. A friend, a photographer that I knew, got Polaroid, started shooting nightclubs. So I went to work for him. I was shooting nightclubs, which only required Friday and Saturday night, and all dance halls in town, and made quite a good money at it. You know, you shoot a picture of them, put it in a little folder, and get the money, and they see their picture right then. I did that for several years, part-time, and I worked my dad on when he was around. I had a service station, and me and my brother worked with him at a service station all the time we was growing up, off and on, you know.
Was your brother military?
No, he never got in the service.
Just one brother?
One brother younger, 2 years younger. And, I had a sister that's 6 years older. And, but my brother, he was, you know, my family was split up. My sister was my half-sister. She didn't actually live with us. She lived with my grandmother and grandfather. And my dad married and had her. His wife died, and so he later on married my mother. Well, in the meantime, before he married my mother, he had to do something with my sister. He wanted to run around, and so he got my grandmother adopted her. And so she was my half-sister, and she only lived with us 1 year.
Were you single all the time you were in the service, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You sound like you worked a whole bunch. You didn't have a whole bunch of time to play around, except maybe that motorcycle get you in a little trouble here and there.
Yeah, well, you know, it's you get used to working, and it's not a bad thing. It keeps you busy, so time passes good. And you know, I bought my first rifle when I was 11, 22 rifle. I bought my first bicycle when I was 9 that I made the money for, you know. When I graduated from high school, I still had that bicycle. It was in better shape than when I bought it, you know. Me and my brother had to work for nearly everything we got. One thing I did about motorcycling is that when I come back from a year at college and went to work at General Dynamics, I asked my mother if I collected about $750 worth of savings bonds. And I asked my mother if I could cash them in and buy me a new motorcycle. You can buy a new motorcycle then, you know, for $750. And so I bought a 1950 Triumph and cashed all my bonds in. First time I'd ever had anything new in my life, except clothes. And I've been riding them ever since.
If you go back to 1950 and you were going to go buy that Triumph, could you buy it on time, or did you have to put down the cash?
Well, I could have bought them on time, but I had the cash. You know, I didn't have to fool around making payments since I wanted it, and you didn't have to make payments. You know, I'd bought several cars and made payments on them, so I had a chance to pay for it and be done with it, and that's what I did.
I think one of the really great things about your story, you were able to take your interest. You were able to take your interest in photography, build that in the Air Force, and then take all of that experience and do something with the rest of your life with all that.
Yeah.
We talk to a lot of vets, and a lot of guys don't take anything from the service and use it when they get out.
Right.
And you spent your whole life in photography.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't exactly the same, because when I went to work for Kodak, they were interested in me. I'd worked in a studio. The studios had started doing their own color. They could send it out as doing color, but they had to send it out to a big lab. And small studios were starting to do their own color. Well, I worked for a studio that had their own color. Well, the only one in Fort Worth that had its own color. And Kodak guy called on us. Well, all the Kodak men knew it was black and white, because they weren't selling color stuff. And my Kodak man told me, said, Bill, you ought to go over and talk to Kodak. You probably make 3 times what you're making as a photographer. And he was right. And so I went and talked to them. They hired me. And what I did when I wasn't selling was teaching customers how to run their own color lab, how to develop it, how to process it, you know, how to correct it. You know, it's a little different black and white. Everything's got to be temperature controlled, but if you don't know how to do it, you have problems. And so that's what they used me for a while. And then pretty soon everybody got their own color, and all I did was call on studios, police departments, any place that had photography.
Interesting job, sounds like.
Yeah, it was an interesting job. I had a lot of customers, mom and pop studios, these little towns all over, and a lot of my customers were friends too. Not only, you know, I'd go be way out in West Texas, and I said, I've got to go get a motel. I said, no, you stay with me, you know. You don't have people like that anymore around. And there's not hardly any mom and pop studios anymore.
Bill, we appreciate you taking the time to come down and talk to us this morning. Appreciate your time in the service. Your interview is broader than just the service. There's a lot of history in what you talk about.
I'll give you too much junk.
No, sir. No, sir. Good interview. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
Good to meet you, sir.